So good afternoon, and everybody, and welcome to RSSL's webinar, which is part of our Veganuary webinar series. And today we're providing an insight into the challenges product developers face when developing vegan products. So I hope you're all staying safe and well during the current pandemic situation we'll find ourselves in. So I'm delighted to introduce my colleagues Carol Bingley and Meg Eade, who will be delivering the technical aspects of the webinar this afternoon on behalf of RSSL. And I will be here to support them. And my name's Jane Staniforth, and I'm the head of food sales within our commercial team. So Meg's going to provide an overview of the current plant-based and vegan market, and then Carol will follow on and discuss some of the technical aspects to consider when developing new plant-based and vegan products. So before we get started, let's just share with you some information in case you're having any technical issues and also wish to pose a question as the team are presenting. So for any technical issues that you're having, please send a short message within the question chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and then the team here will then respond to you directly. And whilst the team are presenting, if you have any questions you wish to ask, please feel free to submit these using the questions box on the right-hand side. We will then do our best to answer these at the end of the formal presentation. Of course, if you have a confidential question, please email me and we will come back to you independently. Okay, so now all the admin has been sorted, let's proceed with the webinar, and let me start by telling you a little bit more about RSSL so you can then understand why we are able to share our knowledge with you today. RSSL has supported the global food industry with a broad range of services since 1987, and we continue to do this even during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic situation that we find ourselves in. Our working practices have adapted to ensure we meet the UK government guidelines, but our scientists continue to be on site completing projects for our clients. We work for many of the top global companies through to small startups too. Our UCAS accredited facility in Reading is where our team of 330 staff are based, and our technical expertise covers a broad range of services, including chemistry, physical sciences, biochemistry, as well as food technology, which is relevant for today's subject. So one of our key strengths is our multidisciplinary teams available to support client needs to deliver projects, which I hope will be demonstrated throughout today's webinar. Our expertise as a business is extremely broad, and we provide a range of services to support both innovation programs as well as food safety and quality manufacturing support. Our product development services includes food technologists working on the bench, developing and optimizing recipes, through to analytical support for your internal NPD teams, as well as regulatory support for health claims. And over the past few years, the RSSL team have been supporting a number of clients with the development of vegan products, and it is this expertise that is key to today's subject. We have found the challenges for the technologists can be very different when developing a plant-based meat, a plant-based milk, or even a fish alternative. And we've been working hard to support clients across many of the different food categories and have learned a lot as we've gone along. So this slide provides an overview of what we will be covering today. So I will now hand over to Carol and Meg to present the technical content of the webinar and tell us more about the current market for vegan and plant-based products and the challenges and aspects to consider when developing plant-based and vegan products. And we'll then do our best to answer any questions that you've asked. So over to Meg.
Hi everyone, I'm Meg, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the current market in vegan and plant-based products and the sorts of trends we're seeing in this area. I'll start by chatting a bit about some statistics and then discuss the market and some examples of the products out there at the moment. So meat reduction is a trend that continues to grow in most Western countries, and the pandemic has not reduced this trend. In fact, it could have increased the demand for it, with the Givaudan survey finding 25% of consumers claim to have consumed more plant-based dairy alternatives since the start of the pandemic. The plant-based market is only expected to grow, with the European market being anticipated to be worth $2.6 billion by 2025. Still, however, when we talk about the plant-based market, we still need to consider that the biggest opportunity is with meat reducers and so-called flexitarians, rather than with just those consuming a vegan diet. First of all, let's consider some of the drivers of plant-based proteins. Obviously, health is often a factor when considering these kind of diets, and the drive from consumers to consume diets which will enhance their well-being is a trend which only ever increases. I'm sure most of you are aware, though, that one of the biggest drivers of alternative and plant-based protein is the environment. Many consumers are aware of how the impact of their diets on the environment, and switching to more plant-based foods is one way which the impact can be reduced, while still allowing us to increase food production for an only ever-increasing population. You can see the graphic here, which shows the effect of the livestock industry on the environment, which is leading consumers to make these changes. Many manufacturers are using the environmental message as a way to market their products. Here are some key statistics to illustrate the increasing popularity of veganism in the current marketplace in some key areas, so the UK, Europe, and the USA. These numbers are not insignificant and now represent an important proportion of all consumers. This, along with the increase in the flexitarianism, presents a continuing opportunity for plant-based products and plant-based development. Here we can see some key data which I've taken from Google Trends on the search of vegan. At the top, we can see how just the frequency of searches in this area has increased drastically over the last 5 years. You can also see the peaks, which usually happen during this time of the year when consumers are taking part in veganuary type initiatives. The second chart underneath shows where searches for vegan are most popular, and you can see Australia and the UK top this list, with New Zealand, Canada, and the United States coming just behind that, showing that this switch to veganism is most popular within developed countries. We are certainly seeing requests for vegan development coming from all over the globe, though, here in the team. Here are some statistics on the European market in particular when it comes to plant-based claims. The left shows the increase in percentage of dairy launches making plant-based claims, with the percentage of those making both vegan and dairy-free claims doubling over the last 5 years. The chart on the right shows the percentage of processed fish, meat, and egg products that are making plant-based claims. And what we can see here is that products making vegan or no animal claims are growing faster than products just making vegetarian claims, which seem to have plateaued. Dairy-free claims in this area, while still low, have also increased rapidly over the past few years. Something to consider when looking at this in both terms of trends, but also how to market your product, is how to define it. So both plant-based and vegans, which are terms which are discussed and thrown around plenty, but what do consumers actually understand about them? And the answer to that is pretty mixed. A British Nutrition Foundation survey found that 41% of British consumers think that plant-based diet means following a vegan diet, 20% equated it with a vegetarian diet, and 8% actually don't know what it is at all. So communication can be really key here to make sure your product is appealing to your target consumers. The survey also found that the most likely age group to follow a plant-based diet are younger people between the ages of 25 and 35, and then also people in the 55 plus group, with a quarter of respondents in these groups likely to do so. This information here from Mintel shows some of the differences in attitude here, with 26% of consumers in France saying they are reducing their consumption of dairy, and 42% of consumers in Spain saying that they're interested in trying dairy and plant-based blended milks, but only 7% of consumers in Italy say that they are actually vegan. And I think this really just shows the opportunity towards these flexitarian diets to target those consumers who are looking to reduce rather than cut out completely. So now to take a quick look at some of the products that you can find on the market. We'll start with meat and fish alternatives. We're starting to see vegan replacements for pretty much every meat product out there, from mince and burgers to steaks and sausages. We're even starting to see our favourite ready meals as vegan alternatives, with this Plant Pioneers product of a vegan chicken tikka masala, showing that this trend is also present in more convenience type sectors. An interesting area of growth at the moment is fish alternatives. There has been breaded white fish alternatives on the market for a while, but we're starting to see the emergence of new products for other types of fish, such as tuna, prawns, and even smoked salmon. The similarity of some of these products are still a little far away from their fish counterparts, but increasing research into the development of these products will result in further emerging technologies and provides an area where there's real potential for growth. With all these products, the main things to consider is that consumers are looking for something which will replicate the experience they get when eating a meat or fish product. And this is key for development, which Carol will discuss with you a bit later on. To look at the dairy and now egg alternatives, dairy alternatives have come a long way over the past few years, and there's a huge amount of milks based on different plant proteins. A fairly new emergence in this area has been milks based on pea proteins to tap into the consumers that may be trying to avoid allergens such as soy. Carol will discuss the various benefits and considerations of different plant proteins when developing later. The variety of vegan cheeses on the market has also increased hugely, with different types being developed for different purposes. Formulation here is incredibly important to give the products the properties required to emulate the non-vegan products, such as the melt and pull of melted cheese. An area which is yet to be fully developed, but that we're seeing products starting to emerge, is the area of egg alternatives. Eggs are a very difficult product to replicate owing to their specific functional properties, and this is certainly something that we have found challenging during our development work here. However, more and more research is happening in this area. An example of this is the Just Egg product here, which is an alternative to scrambled egg based on mung bean protein. And this is a product which is actually a liquid egg alternative, which you can pour into a pan and scramble as you would with standard egg. Products like this are at the front of innovation, and we're definitely something that it's worth keeping an eye on. Finally, when we're talking about the plant-based sector, we also want to consider those products based on plant proteins, like the ones that we see on the slide here. So these are all products that are making protein-based claims, but they're specifically based on plant proteins. Historically, we're used to seeing these claims on things that contain dairy proteins, so this emergence is a trend that's linked to the increase of veganism and plant-based diets. These protein claims are even being made on things not typically previously linked to protein claims, such as ketchup and bread products. We're even seeing this in things like protein shakes and meal replacements, which again are using proteins such as pea, oat, and rice to give a protein boost. Carol will tell you about the different proteins that can be used when developing these kind of products later on. So with that, I'll now hand over to Carol to speak about what's important when developing products for this sector.
Thank you for the market insights, Meg. My name's Carol Bingley, and I'm going to talk to you about what to consider when developing new plant-based and vegan products. I feel that expectation for products in this sector are particularly high. Flexitarian consumers are much less willing to compromise on taste and texture compared to the committed vegan, and this has driven a lot of the innovation in this sector. The nutritional profile of these products is also under the spotlight, along with clean label concerns and expectations around sustainability and environmental impact of the products. In addition, these products are sometimes not considered to provide good value for money, as they're often more expensive than their counterparts. And after all, vegetables are cheaper than meat. There are many reasons for this, such as ingredient processing. So specific processing is required to achieve the functionality required from some of the ingredients used. Also, development and manufacturing costs involved in these products. Availability of some of the ingredients has pushed prices up, and also new products will need marketing and PR to gain attention from consumers. So this all adds up to increasing the overall product cost. It could also be argued that it's not a level playing field, as prices for meat and milk have been kept artificially low over the years. So I think that plant-based alternatives are being held to very high standards, and this provides plenty of challenges for the product developer. A combination of the ingredients used in the product formulation and processing will result in the final taste and texture of the product. As Meg's shown, the trend is very much for the plant-based product to match the taste and texture of the animal-derived product. and the old-fashioned bean burger style products are much harder to find nowadays. And this is because of the drive to attract the flexitarian consumers who are more likely to try products when they offer a familiar experience. And it's particularly relevant for families where you're trying to cater for different tastes. This slide shows the types of ingredients being used in the development of these products. So proteins are usually top of the list when thinking about plant-based development, and I will go into a little bit more detail about proteins over the next few slides. Fats and oils are used to provide succulence and mouthfeel. Coconut oil is being used in many of the burger products, and this is because it's solid at room temperature, and so fat flakes are used to replicate the appearance of meat fat. The coconut oil then melts during cooking and provides a fatty mouthfeel. Vegetable oils can also be used, and algal oils are sometimes used to boost the omega-3 content of the product. Stabilizers and texturizers are critical for binding and providing mouthfeel. Methyl cellulose is widely used in meat alternatives, as this ingredient has unique thermogelling properties, meaning that it forms a gel when it's heated. So this can help products from breaking up during cooking and provide a firm bite to the hot product. Stabilizers such as gellan or carrageenan are used in dairy alternatives, and this helps to suspend the proteins and provide creaminess to the products. Flavors and tastants such as salt, sugar, or yeast extract are necessary to mask any of the undesirable flavors from the base ingredients. And many flavor houses now often offer vegan flavors to provide the characteristic flavor profile, such as beef for burgers or milk for dairy alternatives. Appearance is critical for consumer acceptance, and part of the drive to replicate the experience of a meat product is achieving that color change that you see during the cooking process. So this means using colors to provide a red appearance when the product's raw, but then break down due to the effect of heat to result in a brown caramelized appearance once cooked. Typically, natural colors and vegetable extracts are used for this purpose. And finally, I'll talk a little bit more about nutritional profile later in the presentation, but many products on the market contain added micronutrients such as calcium, iron, or B vitamins to match the vitamins and minerals which would naturally be present in the animal-based product. This slide shows some of the ever-growing list of alternative proteins coming to the market. The legume family is of particular interest, as these proteins tend to have good functionality in terms of the solubility, flavour, and protein quality. Soya protein is the best established of the ingredients, but as Meg showed, pea protein is growing in popularity, and other ingredients such as chickpea and mung bean are starting to be available commercially. In the grains and cereal group, wheat and rice protein are used in many products on the market, and we're also seeing proteins from some of the ancient grains being developed. Nut-based ingredients are particularly popular in dairy alternative products, whereas the seed proteins are not so widely used at the moment, but some of them do have interesting properties that could lead to wider use in the future. In the category of other sources, mycoprotein is a single-celled protein derived from fungus, and it's used in the corn range. This ingredient's been available for over 35 years, and these proteins can be processed so that they mimic the fibrous texture of meat. Potato protein is very interesting due to its gelling and foaming properties, which are fairly unique in the plant protein space. And then microalgae, seaweed, and duckweed are all still in the fairly early stages of development, but they have the possibility of providing highly sustainable sources of protein in the future. And then finally, we've got the novel processes such as cell cultured protein and fermentation processes, and I'll touch on these a little bit later in my presentation. And when we think about protein, it's not just selecting the correct source or blend of proteins, which is critical for achieving the correct taste and texture in the product. The form in which the protein is added is also very important. In the simplest form, the raw materials simply ground to a flour or possibly defatted and then ground, and the protein content will reflect that of the starting material. So this form tends to be the lowest cost option, and the price will increase as the protein content increases. If a more functional or concentrated form of the protein is required, you can use protein concentrates, which contain 60 to 80% protein, or protein isolates, which can be as high as 90% protein. Concentrates and isolates are used widely in dairy alternatives and in meat alternatives, often in combination with texturized protein. Protein hydrolysates tend to be used for protein fortification, and this is because they're more soluble than the other forms. The proteins are broken down into small peptide chains and amino acids. On the downside, hydrolysates can sometimes have bitter off notes, which might limit the use levels. And finally, texturized protein is particularly useful for meat alternatives. The proteins are extruded, which provides a fibrous structure. Low moisture extrusion is most widely used, and this results in dried chunks or pieces, and these have to be rehydrated during production. These pieces work well in products which would traditionally use minced or comminuted meat, so products such as sausages or burgers. And then we have high moisture extrusion, which is a newer process, and it tends to result in longer fibers because of the lower temperatures required. And this is well suited to whole muscle products such as chicken. The high moisture process is more costly than the low moisture route. So just to look at the ingredients used in a couple of sectors in a little bit more detail, wheat and soya dominate in the meat alternative space, but pea protein is growing steadily, while soya has remained relatively flat, and this is despite the huge number of launches in the meat alternative sector over the last few years. And the gelling properties of potato protein that I mentioned earlier are being utilised here to provide a vegan alternative to egg white. And so this has resulted in the increased number of launches with potato protein. I just wanted to highlight some of the pros and cons that we've experienced when working with these ingredients in meat alternatives. So wheat protein provides a firm, chewy texture, and it's also relatively bland in terms of flavour. On the downside, it is classed as an allergen and so needs to be labelled on pack. Soya proteins can also provide a good texture, and the slight beany flavour of soya proteins is fairly easy to mask. However, soya is also an allergen, and some consumers are less accepting of soya for a number of reasons. These can include concerns around the GM status and links to deforestation for soya plantations. Pea protein is not currently required to be labelled as an allergen, and it's also possible to talk about the environmental credentials of this ingredient. It can be grown in Northern Europe, meaning low food miles, and has fairly low water requirements. It does tend to result in a slightly softer texture than soya or wheat, and the grassy or bitter flavour can be a little bit more difficult to mask. I've mentioned the gelling properties of potato protein, which make it a useful ingredient in this sector. However, potatoes contain less than 2% protein, which means that the yield is very low. And this has resulted in very limited availability of potato protein and so a high cost for the ingredient. The use level is also limited by some bitter off notes associated with use of this at higher levels. So we found that certain analytical techniques can be very helpful when you're trying to select the best ingredients for your development. This slide shows microscopy images of 4 commercial burgers. We've got a regular beef burger and 3 vegan options based on mycoprotein, a blend of soya and wheat protein, and a pea protein. The top images were taken using confocal microscopy, and the protein is stained red and the fat is stained green. And you can see that the fat in the beef product is in pools, whereas it's more highly emulsified in the vegan options, and so it appears in small droplets. And this will impact on how the fat is released during the cooking process and in the mouth on eating. The bottom images show the protein stained with toluene blue. In the beef burger, we can see the connective tissue and the elastin in different regions, and this results in a non-homogeneous structure which contributes to the eating experience of the product. The protein structure in the vegan burgers is more homogeneous, and particularly in the pea-based protein. And this will also be reflected in the organic leptic properties of the products. So blending different types of proteins can help to move the texture closer to that of the beef-based product. We then used a texture analyzer to measure the resistance to cutting for the same 4 products. The beef burger product showed the greatest resistance to cutting, and this is represented by the highest peak on the graph. The vegan burgers required less force to cut, with the pea-based product showing the least resistance. And the vegan samples also adhered to the blade, whereas the beef burger cut cleanly. And these analytical techniques were then combined with sensory evaluation. And this approach provides a way to compare the performance of different ingredients and accelerate the development process. So moving on to milk alternatives, oats, almonds and coconuts have been the big success stories in this sector. And this is mainly due to the pleasant flavour and mouthfeel provided by these ingredients. Launches based on soya protein are declining, whereas products based on pea protein are growing, albeit from a very low base. And this reflects some of the consumer concerns that I've already mentioned around sourcing and sustainability of soya, together with the fact soya milk products are seen as being somewhat old-fashioned compared to some of these newer, trendier alternatives. Again, I wanted to just highlight some of the pros and cons of developing with these ingredients. Soya protein concentrates and isolates are relatively soluble, and this allows for the formulation of products which contain an equivalent amount of protein compared to cow's milk. Soya protein is also considered to be a high quality protein, and this is measured by a number of different methods. The most popular being the Protein Digestibility Corrected Amino Acid Score, or PDCAS. And this takes into account the levels of the indispensable amino acids in the protein and the bioavailability of these amino acids. The flavour profile of soya proteins is relatively clean, and working with flavour houses, you can help to mask any off notes. And the downsides of working with soya in a milk alternative are similar to those I mentioned for the meat alternatives. Pea protein can also be used to formulate products which match the protein content of cow's milk. And although the protein quality is a little bit lower than soya, it is one of the better quality plant-based options. As I mentioned previously, it's not required to be labelled as an allergen and has a positive environmental story. The flavour can be more difficult to mask than soya, and some pea protein concentrates are not particularly soluble. So it's worth taking the time to screen a range of ingredients in your formulation in order to select the best fit. Oats result in a pleasant milk alternative with a creamy mouthfeel. They're very well accepted by consumers due to the nutritional qualities of oats. However, it's not possible to achieve the protein content of cow's milk using oats alone. And market products generally in this area contain less than 1% protein, and this is compared to over 3.5% protein in cow's milk. There is a new product coming onto the UK market, and this is based on a blend of oat and pea protein to combine the flavour and mouthfeel benefits of oats with a higher protein content due to the inclusion of pea protein. So I think we may see more of these types of products blending the proteins and getting the best from both ingredients coming to the market in the future. And finally, almonds impart a fairly distinctive flavour to the product, and this is quite well liked by many consumers and tends to pair well with coffee. However, it might not appeal to everyone, and it's maybe not quite so compatible with tea. Almonds are, of course, an allergen and need to be labelled on pack, and also the protein content of the milk alternatives based on almonds is very low. There are also a few concerns with the use of almonds around water requirements and the use of the bees for pollination. Moving on to some of the newer technologies in proteins, fermented protein includes both precision fermentation and biomass fermentation. So precision fermentation refers to the use of genetically modified microorganisms, which are used to produce proteins which are identical to the animal-derived variety. And this technology is being used to produce gelatin, egg whites, proteins, and milk proteins. The first example of commercialization is a fermented whey protein from a company called Perfect Day, and this is being used in an ice cream in the US. And you can see on the slide that it's labeled as non-animal whey protein. The benefit of using this technology is that the proteins provide the same functionality and taste profile as animal-derived proteins, but they're actually suitable for vegans. However, these will be recognized by the body in the same way as the animal-derived protein, and so it's highly likely that consumers with allergies will be equally sensitive to these proteins. And again, you can see that the ice cream product has labeled with contains milk protein. Proteins produced by biomass fermentation have the potential to be highly sustainable. These utilize microorganisms and a limited number of feedstocks, as shown on the slide. These will be completely novel proteins, and at the moment they're in the very early stages of scale up. Cell cultured protein involves removing cells from an animal, mixing with a growth medium, and creating muscle cells, which can be formed into products such as burgers. The final product is meat, but without the need to slaughter the animal, and potentially a much lower environmental impact. This technology has gained plenty of attention from the media, but there are still some barriers to overcome before this is available to the general population. However, technology is seen as having great potential, and a report published last year predicted that 35% of global meat consumption will be in the form of cell-cultured meat by 2040. The first step on this journey was taken in Singapore last year, where regulators issued a company the world's first approval for a cultured chicken product, and sales of this product started just before Christmas. And this is likely to draw more competitors into the area, particularly to Singapore, and could also prompt other countries to follow Singapore's lead in terms of the regulatory situation. So moving on to other aspects that need to be considered when developing products. I mentioned the nutritional profile of vegan products as being in the spotlight, and this is because many consumers cite health as being the top reason for reducing animal-derived products and increasing their consumption of plant-based alternatives. So therefore, there's a need for products to meet this expectation. I touched on protein content when I was talking about milk alternatives. And in the average diet, around 2/3 of the protein comes from animal sources. If you're developing a product which is designed as an easy substitution in the diet, then the protein content and quality should be considered when developing the formulation. Ideally, fat and sat fats and calories will be lower than the animal-derived option. We all know that cutting back on these will be beneficial for health. And I mentioned the use of coconut fat earlier on, and it should be pointed out that the sat fat content of coconut fat is higher than any animal fats. Most meat and dairy products contain little or no fibre, so this actually represents an opportunity for vegan alternatives to offer an advantage. As we know, the majority of consumers need to increase their fibre intake. Fibres can also have a functional benefit in the product because they have water and fat absorption properties, so can be used to help bind the product and maintain succulence on eating. I mentioned micronutrients in the ingredients section, and these are usually added in the form of a premix, which is designed specifically for the end product. and this takes into account processing and packaging, which will ensure that the vitamins and minerals are present at the required levels by the end of shelf life. Moving on to labelling. Clean label, which means a short ingredient list with recognisable ingredients, is a trend that we're seeing across the whole food industry. And products in the plant-based sector are coming under a lot of scrutiny. It's really difficult to achieve a similar taste and texture to a meat-based product, and it's even more difficult to do this with a limited number of ingredients. On the slide, I've shown some information from a company called Lightlife. They're a Canadian company, and they've caused some controversy by sending an open letter to Beyond and Impossible Foods, highlighting the smaller number of ingredients in the Lightlife product. The Lightlife product isn't available in the UK, so I don't know how the quality compares to the bigger brands, but compromises will have to be made if this is the route you decide to take and limit the number of ingredients in your product. You can also see that there are brands within dairy alternatives area which focus on the short ingredient list, and the product on the slide claims only 5 ingredients on the front of pack. However, this will have an impact on stability and taste as they're avoiding hydrocolloids and flavours. The products also won't contain any additional micronutrients such as calcium. Another trend is to highlight ingredients which are not present in the product, and you can see here that no soya and no gluten are displayed prominently on the front of the pack of the burger. Thinking about sustainability, brands are also aware of the interest from consumers around the sustainability and the environmental impact, and this encompasses ingredients, manufacturing, and the packaging. And many companies are finding different ways of communicating and engaging with their consumers on this subject. This company shown on the slide has a calculator on their website, and you can see what impact it would have if you used their vegan product in place of beef mince in a number of everyday dishes. So just to summarise, as Meg showed, the vegan and plant-based market continues to grow at pace. And this is being driven by factors including health concerns, population growth, and environmental impact. I believe that expectations are high for these products, and they're expected to tick many different boxes, and this can be really challenging for the developer. Selecting the right ingredient is critical to achieving the desired taste and texture for your product, and analytical tools in combination with sensory evaluation can help to accelerate this process. Thank you for listening, and I'll now hand back to Jane.
So thank you, Carol and Meg, for sharing your insights into the current market for vegan and plant-based products and highlighting the aspects to consider when developing and launching the products onto the market. So this whole area is one where our product development team have been leading projects for clients over the last 3 to 4 years and have built up considerable knowledge around a very broad range of products, not just meat alternatives, but also other categories too. So I hope from today's webinar, you can see that support is available to ensure a successful, innovative product is developed and launched into our challenging world, both from a product development perspective, but also how some of our analytical services, including our microstructure and texture expertise, can help speed up the development process. So thank you to all those attendees who have asked some questions. We'll now start to work through some of those questions. So the first question is one for you, I think, Carol. So which new ingredients do you think will be popular in the near future?
I think we'll see a continued growth in pea proteins. There's been a lot of investment from a number of ingredient companies in developing the pea proteins, and they are showing good functionality. But I also think we'll see chickpea and fava bean proteins becoming more popular. I'm also interested to see how the algal derived proteins perform. they have a nice sustainability angle and maybe offer some different functionality from the plant-based options.
Thank you, Carol. So next question for you, Megan. What do you think the next biggest trend will be in the plant-based market?
It's difficult to say as there's so much innovation going on in this area, but I think, as I said previously, consumers are really looking to replace all animal-based products with vegan alternatives. So I really think we're likely to see innovation in those areas that maybe haven't seen products yet. So things like alternatives for shellfish and other egg-based applications. These still need a lot of work and a lot of research, but I do think that these kind of products are likely to be the next wave.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Thank you, Megan. So another one for you, Carol, is that you mentioned that, sorry, just looking at it on the screen. There will be maybe increased availability of cell cultured proteins. So do you have any insight into whether these kinds of products would be acceptable to full-time vegans, especially since the origin is still from animals, or will these products be aimed towards more flexitarians?
I think they'll definitely have more appeal to the flexitarian consumer because of the similarity to a meat product. Also, at the moment, there are still some issues that need to be sorted out in terms of the growth medium and ensuring that that is vegan. But my feeling is it probably will be the flexitarians who will be naturally drawn to these products more than the committed vegans.
Thank you, Carol. We've had some questions in around sort of the environmental impact of plant-based proteins compared to that with meat. Whether you have a view on that?
I do have some charts, and obviously there's lots of factors that have to be taken into account. Mostly these proteins are compared to beef, which is has the largest impact of all the animal proteins in terms of land usage, water usage, production of greenhouse gases, and certainly all the plant proteins compare very favourably. If you then start to look at other types of proteins, so maybe poultry-based, they maybe would not be quite so, the differences are less obvious once you look at other proteins. So I'd really have to pull out some further information and get that back to you. It's difficult to give a simple answer, I guess.
Okay, so another question directed at you, Meg. So a lot of vegetarians are skeptical of the new Singaporean lab-produced chicken. Do you have any views onto why that might be?
I guess it's kind of what we've been discussing. I think for the flexitarians, it's something that's quite appealing because it's so similar to actual meat. But I think that for people that are vegetarian and vegan, to them it still is meat. And if they have a preference to not eat meat because they don't like the taste or the texture, then that is still going to be present in these products, which seem to taste almost exactly the same as meat themselves. So I suppose that's where some of the unwillingness is coming from.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, when the Impossible Burger was first launched, there were lots of reports that vegans tried it but couldn't actually bring themselves to eat it because it was so similar to a meat product. They just simply couldn't believe that it was suitable for vegans. So I think it's a similar issue, really. If the better the product is in terms of matching the meat option, the more likely it is that vegans and vegetarians are going to find it unappealing or find it difficult to believe that it is completely free from animal products.
Okay, so thank you, Carol and Meg, for that one. there's a couple about, so would you choose vegan or non-dairy as a marketing description in an ice cream from a marketing perspective, which is going to be more appealing to consumers?
I think you'd have to test that with your target population really, and understand what they respond best to. We're certainly seeing a huge amount of products being launched with vegan labels at the moment. I mean, it's January. There's a lot of promotion going on around Veganuary. So I would say at the moment that does seem to be appealing, but there may be other ways of marketing the product depending on who you're trying to target.
Yeah, I would say also in that area, if you're looking at, you have to consider the allergen side of it as well. If you're saying a non-dairy product, then obviously it's important to consider that you then have a different range of challenges in terms of making sure it's an allergen-free product.
Okay, thank you both. Following up on the conversation about the cleaner label, we've got one question which is around, have you seen developments looking into alternatives to methyl cellulose to help create a cleaner declaration on a product?
Yes, I have, and this is something that I know a lot of companies are very interested in. I've attended some webinars by ingredient suppliers who have specifically been looking at this, using fibers and other ingredients to try and replicate the behavior. The trouble is, methyl cellulose is a very unique ingredient in the way that it gels on heating, and it's quite difficult to mimic that functionality. So I'm not seeing many products coming to the market yet with this technology, but I know the ingredient suppliers know how important it is and are working hard to try and come up with good alternatives which provide the same functionality.
Thank you. And then maybe the last question, I'm conscious of the time, is around, is it more challenging to reduce salt in vegan meat and cheese alternatives than in the meat equivalent? Or is it a similar challenge for a product developer?
I would say often, yes, it is more challenging because you're using the salt to help in a number of ways. It helps to mask those flavors which may be coming through from your proteins or other ingredients you're using. It also helps to enhance the flavors that you're adding into the products. You don't have any of the naturally created flavors and that would give you the umami savory notes. So you're often using yeast extracts, which also contain sodium and have to be declared as salt. So I'd say, yes, it is a lot more challenging.
Okay, brilliant. So thank you, Carol and Meg, for those answers. And we've now come to the end of the webinar, and I hope that you found it useful, and we appreciate the questions that you've asked. We haven't managed to get to answer all of the questions in the time that we have today, and so we will respond to you separately outside the webinar on these, and for some we'll provide some additional information. And just to let you know that tomorrow we have our second webinar in our Veganuary series, which will be providing insight into some of the manufacturing challenges faced when bringing vegan and plant-based products to the market. So if this is of interest and you have not already registered but would like to attend, then please email one of the team and we'll get a registration form out to you. So lastly, on behalf of the RSL team, I'd like to thank you for listening today, and please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any further questions or you need our support with projects, as we're always looking for a new challenge in the plant and vegan-based area. We will be sending out a copy of the slides and a recording of this webinar following the session. They'll come out to you in the next few days. And once the pandemic situation has improved, we look forward to meeting you at future events when we hopefully will be able to meet face to face. But in the meantime, thank you for your time. I hope you all have a good rest of the day, and please do stay safe in the challenging times we find ourselves in. Thank you and goodbye.